What causes a prison riot? Today I'm going to use the New Mexico Prison Riot of February 2nd and 3rd, 1980 as an example and a basis to go off of. Because folks, this can happen at any time. I mean, we've had riots right up to 2020. And we need to make sure that we keep our prison staff safe from becoming hostages in a prison riot. All of us are responsible for that, for the safety and security of everyone behind the prison walls. Let's jump right into the New Mexico Prison Riot, the most violent prison riot in U.S. history. 12 prison staff were taken hostage. 36 hours of violence, of beatings, of rapings, of hanging inmates up, cutting their testicles off and putting them in their mouth. 33 inmates dead, 200 inmates injured. Thank goodness the hostages did not die, but they were hurt and they were taken out to the hospitals after the riot was controlled, after 36 hours of horror. Now, what caused that riot? Well, what caused that riot is the same thing that can cause a riot today, okay? Number one, it was a prison that had 1,156 inmates, but only 963 beds. So, the good old overcrowding is one of the reasons, again. But there were many, many more in the New Mexico Prison Riot, okay? Inmates were not properly classified. You know, I've talked in other videos how important classification is. We are relying on classification to get those inmates in the right areas of the prison so that we as the officers on the floor and the prison staff know which one's high risk. We know which one has mental health issues. We know which one is an escape risk. We know which one is violent towards prison staff. Now, all inmates can become violent at any time. Yes, we know that. But we try to classify them ahead of time so that we can figure out what's going on and know where to put them, know how to educate our officers on the front line. Okay, that didn't happen in the New Mexico Prison Riot. Inmates were just all mixed together, all classifications mixed together. Okay, cockroaches and mice and intestinal diseases were going on in the New Mexico State Penitentiary. Now, some of you are saying, who cares? You know, those of you that don't know a lot about prison, who cares? They get what they ask for. Well, folks, we have staff members working behind those prison walls with those cockroaches and mice and intestinal diseases. We don't want the staff members to get that either. Number two, we don't want to give the inmates the most comfortable hotel in the world to live in, but we also don't want a riot and we don't want officers taken hostage. Please think outside the box when you say things like, you know, who cares? Think outside the box at the consequences that occur when you play tough guy or tough girl, who cares? Because you're living in that environment as well, and we sure don't want you to become a hostage. A visiting warden to that prison right before the riot had gone to visit the New Mexico State Penitentiary and said it was one of the filthiest institutions he has ever seen. Well, that should have been a sign. There was tons of signs ahead of time, folks. They'd even had little mini riots there in the years prior to 1980. In 1976, the New Mexico State Penitentiary had a riot or a holdout for work until the conditions became better. So the way they fixed that problem was the warden approved tear gas to be used. And then after they tear gassed the inmates, they lined up officers with a 100-yard gauntlet with axe handles. And they beat the inmates with axe handles as they ran down the gauntlet, okay? Now, somebody's going to say, well, good, they got what they deserve. No, that doesn't help the situation, folks. That does not help anything. You know, 1980, today, I mean, that was a crime then. That's a crime now. You can't do that. But the main thing is when you do stuff like that, you're just building that time bomb with those inmates. Now they not only live in overcrowded conditions, dirty conditions, sick with intestinal diseases because of the filth of the prison, wrong classification of inmates all mixed together. Now you do that and you're building their anger up, and you are just building a time bomb ready to explode, which did in 1980. Okay? So they also did not train the officers properly. It's documented in 1980 that they were very short-staffed. Hey, surprise, short-staffed in 1980. We're short-staffed today. But here's the problem. The turnover rate at that penitentiary was so high that they had staff that wasn't very well experienced. Not that they weren't good staff, not that they weren't smart, not that they couldn't handle it. They just were too young and too new and had no guidance from above. I'm going to go back to the old administration. You need to guide and train these officers. That wasn't happening at this prison as well. And if any of these things I'm discussing right now, these causes, is happening now, today, in 2021 at your prison, then be aware you're setting yourself up for a time bomb, okay? Let's make sure we're on the ball with this. It's just amazing to me how we cannot see these things happening. They didn't see them happening in 1980, or they didn't care to take care of the problem. You know, if you have a warden that lines up a gauntlet of officers with axe handles to beat inmates, then there's part of the problem right there, the administration. Somebody said the other day, do we always have to blame administration? No, we don't. We don't always have to blame administration. But when something goes down like this, who's the first one that they look at? Either by the internal investigation, outsiders looking in, who's at fault? Who's at fault? Well, the warden is in a tough job, folks. I've seen wardens get blamed for things that they didn't do that the officers did. The warden would be home on a Saturday night, and officers would beat an inmate to death at the prison. Well, the warden got fired as well. You know, it's a tough job being a warden. Sometimes the wardens are not the problem, and sometimes they are. I would say in this riot incident that the warden was definitely, warden assistant went on down, was an issue. Nobody was taking care of these problems, okay? You know, the warden who initiated what is now called the Night of the Axe Handlers, okay? That's a story in itself. They call this Santa Fe Prison Riot the Butcher Shop, the Hate Factory. There's so many names for it. And you know what is scary to me? You know, Maryland, 2 or 3 years ago, had that terrible hostage situation where the lieutenant was killed. It's not a situation that we need to shrug our shoulders at. These incidents and these causes are very, very real, and they happen today. So not as severe as this, where all of it was in a shell, but, well, I don't think I mentioned the New Mexico State Prison Riot also had food issues, which you would imagine if it's that filthy with cockroaches and mice. That's how the intestinal disease came about. We've had riots here in Florida. I remember one at Hardee Correctional Institution with staff and inmate injuries. It was over just the food alone, not the living conditions. Just the food alone being bad, and the inmates had complained about it for a long, long, long time, and then finally they went off. You know, there are things we can do to prevent prison riots. Yes, we're going to have firm, fair, and consistent with the inmates. We're going to be that way. We're going to make them do what they're supposed to do. But we can do it in a professional manner without fueling the fire. We don't want to fuel the fire and have a riot. Then we're placing not only ourselves, but all of our fellow officers and prison staff members in danger, and we're placing all the inmates as well in danger. We've got to use our noggin a little bit, folks. Think out ahead. I'm going to ask administration, if your officers on the front line bring problems to you. Hey, we got filth over here in this dorm. We got inmates suggesting a problem. They're going to do this or do that. We can't just go, oh, they just need to do what we tell them and don't worry about it. No, we need to actually look at the problem and see what the problem is to keep a time bomb from exploding like it did in the New Mexico State Prison Riot. The reason I go on and on about this is I don't want to see any more officers hurt or prison staff. We've had officers killed, officers hurt badly in prison riots. We've had female officers taken hostage and repeatedly raped. In this prison riot, they broke into where the inmate snitches are, the inmates who were actually separated from the other inmates. One thing that they did do, they kept the informants separated at the New Mexico State Penitentiary. And they got the keys from officers and they busted in there and they put metal bars up their rear ends. They hung them upside down. They hung them up by their neck, cut their testicles off, stuck them in their mouth. They did some violent stuff. They used axe handles and metal bars to beat inmates and crush every bone in their body. Bloody mess. Folks, we don't want that. That's why I'm going over the causes of a prison riot. When you see something wrong, write it up, turn it in, keep a copy, and kind of follow up with your immediate supervisor. You know, don't go running to the warden's or assistant warden's office crying, I turned this in. Ask your sergeant, ask your lieutenant, hey, I turned this in. Sarge, you know, it's getting bad down there in that dorm. Anybody going to do anything about it? I'm doing what I can as an officer. You know, take the initiative yourself as a frontline officer, but let's hope you're getting some backing from your supervisors. I just wanted to talk about the New Mexico State Prison Riot as an example because it seemed to have all the elements of a time bomb and all the things that we should be watching out for. Now, one thing that I'm going to say is a little trivia. They had the untouched cross. The prison chapel was basically untouched, and there's a cross at the front of the chapel on the wall, and it was untouched. And there's stories out there about the untouched cross in the 1980 New Mexico State Penitentiary Prison Riot. That is another story all in itself. That prison riot could be broken down into probably 8 different videos. Don't worry, I'm not going to do that, but I'm using it as an example today for what causes a prison riot. But if you've never studied the New Mexico Prison Riot, it's used in training and has been used in training many times across this country. If your agency isn't using it for training, get out there and investigate it yourself. Read about all the things that went wrong at the New Mexico State Penitentiary Prison Riot and use that for your knowledge, because knowledge is power to prevent prison riots. Thank you for watching. Gary York, True Prison Stories.